Governments have borrowed trillions of dollars, pounds and euros to fight the coronavirus pandemic. That's money used to pay people's wages and create support checks, grants to keep businesses afloat, extra money for health services, and so on. All that borrowing. We're going to have to pay it back, aren't we? That's what we often hear. Here's the UK's Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak, in March.
The amount we've borrowed is comparable only with the amount we borrowed during the 2 world wars. It's going to be the work of many governments over many decades to pay it back.
But is it right? Do we need to pay it back? Well, not really. Here's why. That money is borrowed by governments from investors, some domestic, some abroad, in the form of bonds. Those investors might be pension funds who are looking after our retirement savings, or insurance companies, or companies with spare cash, or banks. Some of those bonds are scheduled to be repaid in 2 years, some in 5 years, some not for a decade, some not for 30 years. Now, of course, when those redemption dates fall, governments will have to return the money they've borrowed. But guess what? At that point, governments can simply borrow more money from those very same investors. In other words, they can roll over the debt. And at the moment, most Western governments can roll debt over at close to the lowest interest rates ever. Does that mean governments never need to worry about paying back debt? The answer is that this is simply the wrong way to frame the question. The right way to frame it is not to think of recent borrowing in cash terms, but to think of the size of the total national debt in relation to the overall size of economies. If debt as a proportion of the overall economy is high and growing, those are the warning signs. That's when we need to be concerned about the risk of a government debt crisis, with spiralling interest rates and an inability of governments to roll over their national debts. So what has all that coronavirus borrowing done to national debts relative to the size of national economies? The answer is that it's pushed it up quite a lot. In the UK and the US, it's roughly the same size as the entire economy now, 100%. In the UK, it's not been that high since the 1960s, though note that it was much higher after the Second World War. And is it growing fast? Is the second warning sign flashing? Well, it is at the moment because governments have been borrowing a lot and economies have been shrinking. Borrowing by the US and the UK in 2020 was around between a fifth and a sixth of the size of the economy, the highest rate seen in peacetime. But when the economy recovers, the government won't be borrowing so much and the economy won't be shrinking. That means the debt as a share of the economy should stabilise. And if economic growth rates are higher than borrowing rates as a share of the economy, in the years ahead the national debt should start to shrink relative to the size of the economy. So is there nothing to worry about? Not necessarily. But the key question to focus on is this. What will be the gap between a government's spending levels and its tax revenues when the crisis is over and the economy has returned to normal? Will future tax revenues be much smaller than previously expected? The red dotted line shows previous expectations of a country's tax revenues. The green line shows new expectations. The gap between the two is the damage done by the crisis to a nation's public finances. If that gap is big, the debt as a share of the economy will continue rising. That's when we should be concerned and seeking to bring down borrowing through tax rises or spending cuts. But here's the very important bit. If we cut back borrowing too soon out of a fear of accumulating debt before the economy has recovered, we risk holding back the recovery. That could make the economy and tax revenues permanently smaller than it would be if we carried on supporting the economy through borrowing. That would be self-defeating. So timing is crucial. Now is the time for government and for all of us to concentrate on securing the recovery. We shouldn't be worrying about the size of our national debts, and we shouldn't be asking questions about how and when we start to pay off our coronavirus borrowings.